Now that's on.
Okay, I don't want. I'd like to call this meeting to order. The first order of business is the HTE Instructor Awards.
Hello, everyone. For those of you who do not know me, I am the new Hunter Trapper Education and Outreach Division Chief for the Pennsylvania Game Commission. As the Division Chief, I am responsible for developing and implementing strategies and efforts to recruit, retain, and reactivate hunters and trappers, which also includes overseeing and expanding the agency's Hunter Trapper education programs that aim to instill safe, ethical hunting and trapping practices in Pennsylvania. Today, I am here with AJ Garcia, our Hunter Trapper Program Administrator, to recognize some outstanding Hunter Trapper education instructors across our state. Before doing so, I would like to take a moment to thank all of our Hunter Trapper education instructors who donated over 9,100 hours of their time and certified over 13,000 individuals in Hunter Trapper education in the 2021-22 physical year. To all of Pennsylvania's Hunter Trapper education instructors, we appreciate each day, hour, and minute that you dedicate to teach safe, ethical hunting and trapping practices in our state. Now we would like to recognize the instructors who will be receiving a Regional Outstanding Instructor of the Year award. Each instructor presented with an award today was nominated by a local state game warden for going above and beyond as a hunter education instructor. Okay, so first, nominated by State Game Warden Michael Stutz Jr., our recipient from the Northwest region is George Wilkos from Erie County. George has been a Hunter Trapper education instructor since 1986 and also volunteers his time as a Deputy State Game Warden. George is the lead instructor for his district, keeping up with 9 other hunter education instructors. During the past year, George successfully held 5 Hunter Trapper education courses across the district and certified 114 students. George, we thank you for your dedication to hunter education. Would you please come up here and get your award? The next nominee will be presented by Seth.
Hello, I'm Seth Mazoris. I'm the Information and Education Supervisor for the Southwest region. Our nominee was nominated by State Game Warden Brian Witherite. Our recipient is Roger Mason from Somerset County. Roger has been a Hunter Trapper education instructor since 2008 and was involved in all of the hunter education courses provided within his district during 2021. Roger was also instrumental in getting a new class started in one of the sportsmen's clubs in the area that we had lapsed during 2021, and we hadn't had one for about 5 or 6 years, so Roger was instrumental in getting that back in our sportsmen's clubs. State Game Warden Witherite is not here today, but he notes that Roger is patient with the kids and encourages them to participate by getting them out of their seats to help with the skills taught during their class. Roger understands the importance of reaching every student, and his positive actions are contagious with other instructors. Roger is a positive reflection of the hunter education program. Roger, thank you for your dedication to hunter education. Roger, could you please come forward? Thank you. Thank you, brother. Appreciate it.
Okay. Nominated by State Game Warden Salvador Cefudo, our recipient of the South Central Region is David Behe from Altoona. David became a hunter-trapper education instructor in 2018 and is always available when needed to teach a class. State Game Warden Cefudo notes that David is a positive role model for students. He goes above and beyond to know the law and gives students correct information. He takes his knowledge outside the classroom, teaching adults that he meets, and has helped with numerous game law cases resulting in convictions. David, thank you so much for your dedication to hunter education. Will you please come up and get your award? It's all right, take your time. Thank you.
Thank you. I got your article in the mail yesterday.
Did you like it?
Yes, I did. Thank you, sir.
David, congratulations.
Thank you very much. He has a nice bio.
And we'll have pictures right out here.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, next, nominated by State Game Warden Wayne Hunt, our next recipient from the North Central region was unable to be here today. Ben Porkalob has been the hunter education instructor since 2008 and is also the conservation education coordinator for the Elk Country Visitors Center. Ben has helped secure many locations for past classes, and State Game Warden Hunt notes that Ben is the future of hunter education in his district. If you are listening from home, Ben, thank you for your dedication to hunter education. The next nominee will be presented by State Game Warden John Velipak.
I'm State Game Warden John Velupek from Lancaster County. I'd like to say a few words about my nominee, Ron Tomasetti. Ron has been a hunter ed instructor since 1973. He's been a deputy state game warden for over 20 years. Ron was a member of the Army 101st, 101st Airborne, and was a combat veteran in Vietnam. He was awarded 2 Purple Hearts, a Silver Star, a Bronze Star, and a Vietnam Cross of Gallantry. After receiving his honorable discharge, Ron got his bachelor's degree from Penn State. He drove a truck for 20 years and now has a consulting firm doing accident reconstructions for commercial transportation companies. In 2013, Ron suffered a debilitating accident which has since confined him to a wheelchair. Through the use of a motorized wheelchair and microphone, and with the assistance of fellow instructors Lowell and Tracy Graybill, Ron has not let that keep him from providing instruction at Milton Grove's hunter ed classes. He has attended all classes at Milton Grove for years, providing instruction and reading the certification test to students. Ron has been married to his wife Kathy for 38 years. They have 4 children and 8 grandchildren. I'd like you to join me in congratulating Ron on his nomination and honoring his service to this country. Thank you.
Okay, last but not least, nominated by State Game Warden Aaron Morrow, a recipient of both the Northeast Region and statewide Hunter Education Outstanding Instructor Award is Marty Schaefer Callahan from Wyoming County. Marty has been a hunter education instructor since 2014 and has been instrumental in getting hunter education courses up and running in Wyoming County. State Game Warden Morrow notes that Marty not only cares deeply about the Commonwealth's hunting and trapping heritage, but also cares deeply about the future of our hunting and trapping traditions and the young men and women who will carry on these traditions in our state. Marty, thank you for your dedication to hunter education. Please come up and get both of your awards. Thank you so much.
And if you don't, I'll carry these out for you.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. And a round of applause for all of our hunter education instructors. Thank you.
Next, we'd like to recognize a team member here at the Pennsylvania Game Commission for 25 years of service to the wildlife resource and to the agency and to the citizens of Pennsylvania. I'd like to bring up James Roberts. Congratulations and thank you. Next up to present an award is Roger Coop.
Thank you, Brian. For those that don't know me, I'm the Wildlife Management Supervisor in the Northwest region. And last year, one of our employees, one of my folks, Shelby Sherwood, encountered a vehicle on fire while she was out doing field work with her state vehicle. She encountered an elderly driver that had flicked a cigarette that went into material in the back of his truck, and his truck caught on fire. She stopped, got the driver away from the truck, and used the fire extinguisher from her state vehicle to put the fire out. Prevented possible injury to the driver and certainly possible serious damage to the vehicle. She kept her cool and did an outstanding job, and I really felt she should be recognized for that. And of course, this was last year when COVID was still rearing its ugly head, so it took a while to get things through, but I wanted to make sure she got recognized for that, and she's being recognized today. Shelby, would you come up? That was close. Thank you. Thank you, Shelby.
For the next award, I'd like to bring up Mr. Mike Reeder.
Good afternoon, Commissioners, Executive Office staff, and guests. My name is Mike Reeder, and I am the Director of the Centralized Dispatch Operations Center. And today we'd like to recognize two individuals for their outstanding actions. On the morning of May 19th, 2022, the Pennsylvania Game Commission Central Dispatch Center received an alert from PSP Troop H in Newport. The alert was for an individual that had stolen 3 firearms from his mother's residence the night before. The individual was a known drug user and had his 8-year-old child with him. Dispatcher Scott Swieger received the alert and requested to send out a BOLO, or be on the lookout, to all the wardens working in that area. That morning, Warden Michael Smith, stationed in Perry County, was performing a ride-along with a high school student and his mother for a school project. He encountered the vehicle pulling off of Pine Hill Road just outside of Shermansdale. A woman driving and a person matching the description of the robbery suspect was in the passenger seat. The vehicle pulled onto the road and continued on North Pine Hill Road. Warden Michael Smith radioed Newport PSP and informed him that he was following the vehicle. Since Warden Smith had civilians in his vehicle, he was unable to make the vehicle stop. He followed them a short distance and secured the license plate. He was also able to follow them a few miles, updating PSP with their location. Due to the layout of the roads in the area, Warden Smith eventually lost sight of the vehicle. PSP reported to the area, and then within a short time, were able to, locate the vehicle and suspect. PSP was able to effect a vehicle stop and was able to take him into custody. And the 8-year-old was recovered and remained safe. Due to the actions of both Dispatcher Swieger and Warden Smith, not only was a warranted individual apprehended, but an 8-year-old youth was removed from a possibly very dangerous situation. Mr. Smith, Mr. Swieger, come on up.
For our next award, I'd like to bring forward Region Director Dan Figure.
Thank you, Brian. It's my pleasure to present a life-saving award to Deputy State Game Warden Michael Scott. During this year's spring gobbler hunt, Deputy State Game Warden Mike Scott was on general patrol in Sullivan County. At approximately 0830 hours, he heard a radio call about an individual that was trapped underneath the tractor. Apparently, the operator was pulling stumps with the tractor, and the tractor flipped over and landed on top of him. Deputy Scott wasn't far from the location, and he immediately responded. He arrived within a few minutes and was the second person on scene. There was already a local firefighter on scene at the time, and they both attempt to rescue the operator of the tractor. Deputy Scott began running back and forth to the barn several times, trying to find different things to pry the tractor off of the victim. Wooden blocks, boards, anything he could find and carry at the time. The victim was awake and conscious when Deputy Scott arrived. However, by the time EMS arrived, his condition was deteriorating. When the victim was finally freed from the tractor and transported into a helicopter, he was in very serious condition, suffering from broken ribs and a punctured lung. Luckily, for the quickness in response and the actions taken by Deputy Scott and the others, the victim is still alive today.
Well, that concludes our award presentations. Congratulations to everyone recognized here today. We're going to take about a 10-minute break so they can get photos finished, and then we'll get started.
In a couple minutes.
If we could have everybody start to take their seat. Dave Mitchell out there, if you could gather up all the turkeys and bring them on in.
We'd like to get this started with the staff presentations, and the first one will be the American Marten Reintroduction Feasibility Assessment and Recommendation with Tom Keller.
Good afternoon, Commissioners, executive staff. It's my privilege to present to you today our findings from the feasibility assessment for the reintroduction of American Marten to Pennsylvania. So there's several critical factors of a reintroduction feasibility assessment that we needed to take into account. The first of those is history. So what did it look like when we had marten here in Pennsylvania at one time? As well as ecology, we need to understand the marten, how it interacts with other species, its habitat needs, which leads us to trying to determine, do we have the needed habitat remaining in Pennsylvania for such a reintroduction? And then, of course, again, potential impacts to other species as well as from other species to marten. And past reintroductions, fortunately, there's been a lot of reintroductions for marten throughout their range. And so we have a lot to draw from, which is really helpful. And probably one of the most important things is having the right reasons. So why are we going to possibly consider this? So marten were once a common native species prior to extirpation in Pennsylvania. Extirpation occurred around the early 1900s. We believe most were lost by about 1920 based on historic records. And they were lost because of primarily deforestation in the 18th and 19th centuries, as well as unregulated harvest. What we see here is a map of Pennsylvania and some of our historic records. Prehistorically, we have evidence that marten actually ranged entire way down into Tennessee, North Carolina. So they would have been through much of the forested areas of the state. Historic records show that most marten were north of 80, and you can see here primarily north central, into the northwest, up into Warren County, and then actually out into the east, following some of those fingers that we see where game lanes like 57, 13 start to spread out too. So marten are a medium-sized mustelid, which is really a weasel, our weasel family here in Pennsylvania, and they have specific habitat needs and a diverse diet. You can see here just kind of a rough comparison between the marten, the fisher, the river otter, the mink, and the weasel. And I brought some pelts here to kind of help provide that. Because we haven't had this animal for over 100 years, most people aren't familiar with it, and I had a devil of a time just trying to find a mount that was reasonable to present. But I do want to show you, this is a marten, this is their size, and this is a mink. So you can see they're actually, when we look at data, they're actually pretty much exactly the same size as a mink. Another good example is a fox squirrel. So here's an adult fox squirrel. But I think what's most impressive as far as size-wise is the difference between a fisher and a marten. And I think there's a lot of confusion there on the size between these two. So it's quite substantial. The marten's substantially smaller. As far as habitat needs and diverse diet, I will get into diet here in a little bit, but when we look at overall diet, and this is percent frequency of occurrence, which adds up to more than 100, we see that it's easily small mammals, and when I say that, I mean primarily rodents, voles, shrews, as well as other small rodents make up, again, a large majority of their diet. This other category, a large majority of that's actually insects, so about 17% of what martens eat are insects. And then deer or moose carrion, depending on where these studies were conducted. And then plants, surprisingly to me, when I started through this research, marten actually consume quite a bit of plant material. And then you can see birds, squirrels, hare, rabbit, and then actually other weasels. It's very difficult to describe marten habitat in a single slide, but I think this is a good representation of marten habitat. And when we think of marten habitat, two words come to mind, and that's structural complexity. And what that means is basically from the forest floor the whole way up to the canopy, there is a lot of structure available to martens. And so what we see in this picture, we see down logs, we see root balls, rocks, we see standing dead and standing live trees with cavities. And again, we have that understory, mid-story, and then of course the canopy as well. So this is a good representation that meets all the needs that a marten has during their life cycle. So Pennsylvania currently has suitable marten habitat, and it has it in quantity, quality, and connectivity. Now this was somewhat of a challenging thing to get to because we don't have marten here. So how do we determine how we have suitable habitat or not, or whether we do? And so the first thing we did is we worked with the GIS division to develop a spatial habitat suitability model. And this model takes into account 4 particular things that are important for marten. So land cover, snow cover, percent canopy cover, and then canopy height. And what we did is we tweaked each one of these that was specific to marten habitat needs for each one. We combined those, and then we analyzed those at the home range of a marten. We did this not just for Pennsylvania, but we wanted to do this for northeastern states as well as Michigan. The importance of that is we needed a way to truth this model. If we would have just developed this for Pennsylvania, we would have no way of knowing whether it was accurate or not. And so by doing this, we know we can compare it to where known populations are and make sure that it actually lines up. So what you're seeing here is this dark green is what we consider optimal. And then as the colors go down, we have high, moderate, fair, and poor. So the darker the green, the more optimal the habitat. And I'm going to show you where we have known populations. And just pay attention to where these dark green areas are. So here are known populations that we have. And we're able to get a lot of good data from these states. And so when we look at Pennsylvania, we see that we have quite a bit of optimal and high quality habitat still remaining in Pennsylvania. And so one of the most important things to look at here is not just that we have it in quantity, but we also have it a lot of connectivity. Marten have a large home range and require a lot of room to be able to move around. Now, when considering reintroduction, and we've learned this from our wild pheasant recoveries, and we've learned this and are learning it from our bobwhite quail recovery programs, it's important to choose areas with high public land acreage. And that just allows for a little bit more control over habitat, and the habitat's less affected by market value. When we overlay public lands, what we see is that a lot of the optimal and high quality habitat falls nicely within our public land areas within the state. And again, it's up in that core area, what we call the PA wilds, and then of course up into the northwest on some federal lands. The last part of this suitability analysis is actually boots on the ground. And so what we did is in November of last year, we invited a number of marten biologists and ecologists to come out. So we had folks from Michigan, Minnesota, Wisconsin. They came down, they spent 3 days with us. We covered about 600 miles, about 20 counties, and we really focused on that northern tier where we thought we had this suitable habitat. And we wanted to confirm it with folks that have been working on martens for most of their lives. It was very encouraging because what we found was that they felt, again, that we had the suitability was there, the connectivity was there, the quantity was there. And actually in some cases they said in some places it looked better than where they actually had existing populations of marten within their states. So again, very encouraging, and we were very thankful for their time. So negative impacts from martens to other species is minimal. When we say other species, we developed a list of species of concern. Here are some of those species, not all of them, but here are some of the species that were of concern, whether they're actually species of greatest conservation need, or whether they're just species of concern to other biologists because of potential declines, or even because they're concern of the public. And so it's important to consider all of these species. Here we have the Allegheny wood rat, the snowshoe hare, the northern flying squirrel, ruffed grouse, northern goshawk, and the wild turkey. Probably the best way to determine whether there is going to be impact to these species is to look at detailed diet analysis. Fortunately for marten, we were able to pull some extensive diet research from 13 different states from across, and Canada, provinces from across Canada and North America and the United States, to be able to get to this question of what exactly are marten eating. So we averaged those, and the first thing to consider here is just the breadth of items that marten will eat. And it's pretty astounding compared to a lot of species that have a much smaller amount. But the other thing to consider is really what's on top. So what are they eating most of the time? And so what they're eating most of the time is rodents. And we see that again. We have a variety of voles, shrews. Again, insects are there at number 4. And then we also have a lot of mice. When we consider the species of concern that we had on our slide before, we see that snowshoes are somewhere in the middle. Grouse are towards the bottom. We didn't have Allegheny wood rats, but we compared it to another wood rat species, and that was towards the bottom. And then flying squirrels were also towards the very bottom. 2 species that you don't see on here are the wild turkey, and you also don't see the northern goshawk. And I would certainly be remiss to say that they wouldn't take advantage of those 2 species, but in the diet research that we found, we could not find those species listed. Even eggs and things like that, it did not seem like marten pursued things like that. So that's important to note. I thought this was interesting, and that you'd find it interesting that martens eat other martens. And so that has occurred with our fisher in Pennsylvania. We did some detailed fisher diet analysis, and fisher eat a lot of other fisher. So again, just an interesting fact to throw in there. So negative impacts from other species to marten is minimal. And when we say other species here, we're primarily referring to fisher, bobcat, other weasels, and then coyotes. These are, of course, competitors with marten. Some have very similar diets, while others prey on much larger animals than marten do. And to determine whether these would be a problem as far as a real competitor that would outcompete the marten, we wanted to look at how marten might be able to, what we call partition, or separate themselves from these other species. The first way that they partition is through diet. And so what we did is we worked with the Western PA Conservancy to develop a detailed prey abundance analysis based on historic small mammal trapping within the state. And what they found lines up nicely with actually what primary food items for marten are. So you see, again, voles, mice, shrews, and other small mammals. And they found that they are very abundant, and that prey would not be a limiting factor. And what this means to us is that they will not need to compete as much with these other predators, and this will allow for that coexistence. Another way that we can look at partitioning is through snowfall, and snowfall is very important for marten. Marten actually spend a large proportion of their time during the winter time under the snow, and what we call the subnivean layer. And they spend it under there because they can get away from the winter weather. It's a good thermal rest area. But more importantly, it keeps them out of the way of trouble with other predators, and allows them to outcompete other predators because a lot of small mammals are working under that snow. When you think about when your yard melts off and you see all those little trails, all those little vole trails, that's exactly what marten are pursuing under the snow. Another way that they can partition is through habitat. And habitat in this part of the state where we have suitable habitat is driven primarily by elevation and topography. And you can see the more diverse elevation topography changes we have, the more microhabitats that we have in these areas. And this just allows, again, for that coexistence between marten and some of these other predators. Negative impacts from future climate changes to marten are predicted to be minimal. And so there's a lot of different climate models out there. We looked at a lot from the Pennsylvania, from the Northeast. And what we found, we settled on this one. It's a Nature Conservancy climate model. And what this is showing us is that the green and blue is showing high resilient areas to potential climate change in the future. And so that resiliency is important because it means that forest composition should stay relatively stable. So habitat would stay stable, as well as it provides increased biodiversity, and it provides flow for animals to move around and connectivity of habitat. Marten are one of the most often reintroduced fur-bearer species, and past efforts have proven largely successful. When we look at this map is showing us current range in green, historic range in lines, and then these white dots are actually reintroduction efforts. And so we have over 40 reintroduction efforts to look at. All have been fairly well documented. And I think what's most telling from this map is if you look at some of these areas, marten were reintroduced into some very small pockets of suitable habitat that are fairly isolated. And so if you look in South Dakota, in the Black Hills, if you've ever spent any time out there, that's pretty much an island out in South Dakota of good habitat, and marten persist well there. When we look at some of these islands, actual islands off of Alaska, off of Canada, marten have been reintroduced there and are doing well. And then even in the upper lower peninsula of Michigan, they've reintroduced marten with success. And so when we consider how much suitable habitat we have here in Pennsylvania and how connected it is, we would assume that we would have a very high likelihood of success based on these other reintroduction efforts. So there are many reasons for marten reintroduction. We're going to talk about some ecological, political, cultural, social, and economic reasons. The first is ecologically. The marten is a missing piece from our current ecological system. We have a strong community of wildlife in Pennsylvania, but there's some missing pieces. And although we don't know exactly how marten fit into that as far as what benefits they provide, we do know that some good research has shown us that marten are an important seed disperser in some habitats, and we would expect that here, and it's because of their large home range. They travel a lot, as well as because of the amount of plant materials they eat. So some vegetation relies on good seed dispersers. So that's just an example of a process that would benefit the overall environment. And we know that biodiversity overall and increasing biodiversity creates a healthier community. We have to remember we're part of that community. And then when we think of the political side of things, biological diversity is in our strategic plan. It's in our sister agency strategic plan. It's in federal agencies that work within the state strategic plans. It's an important part of what we deem as an important goal of maintaining and increasing biodiversity. And of course, this is one of those strategic plan goals that we're talking about today. And it's not just Pennsylvania, it's on a global scale, particularly with the Convention on Biological Diversity and how the United States participates with that. It's important culturally. Pennsylvania has a rich history of indigenous tribes, indigenous peoples, and unfortunately, we don't have indigenous tribal lands in Pennsylvania currently. We still have many indigenous peoples that call Pennsylvania home. And so it's important to consider the rich culture that they have and that marten play in that culture. They've often are seen in legends and stories and are often depicted as clan animals for many tribes. As far as economically and socially, Pennsylvania draws a good proportion of GDP from our outdoor recreation industry in Pennsylvania. We attract a lot of folks from out of state, and this northern tier, and particularly the PA Wilds, attracts a lot of folks. And some of that, we have great examples with elk, and we have other examples where we took species that were gone, we reintroduced them, iconic species that draw in a lot of people. Pennsylvania, if we would do this, would be on the southern range of marten on the East Coast. And so we have that ability to attract a lot of attention from folks that want to come up and enjoy Penn's Woods. And not just the non-consumptive users, but also our trappers. Marten was at one time an important fur bearer for trappers in Pennsylvania. And if we can get marten back to the point where they could sustain a harvest, we have the possibility of reopening a trapping season. And we saw that with beaver, otter, fisher. We had great success, and now we have strong numbers and strong numbers of trappers as well. Our trapper numbers continue to rise, and a lot of that's because of opportunity that we provide here in Pennsylvania that many other states can't offer. To continue with the social side of things, public opinion is extremely important. This is not a decision that we take lightly, and it's important to make sure that the public is behind us in this. So we took the opportunity to take advantage of a public opinion survey that was going out last year. We were able to add some questions to that specific to marten. And one of those questions was, do you support or would you support the possibility of a reintroduction of American marten? And what we saw with all participants was 92% supported, 7% opposed. We were able to censor those by those that identified as a hunter. Again, 92% of hunters said that they supported it, 7% said they opposed. And finally, as far as reasoning goes, this agency has set a precedence and has developed a legacy for ecological restoration. And here is a handful of species that were either on the brink or completely extirpated that those folks that came before us made a priority, and they were able to bring these species back to the state. And now we see these commonly. How often do you see an eagle now? Folks that go up and visit the elk range, white-tailed deer are everywhere. Turkeys are doing well. We have trapping season for otters and fishers. So this is our chance to continue that legacy. There aren't many species left to be able to reintroduce. This is a great opportunity. The timing seems like it's a good time. We have staff resources available. And so for these reasons, the Bureau of Wildlife Management recommends the reintroduction of American marten to Pennsylvania. And really what we're asking for as the Bureau to the board is for your permission to move forward to the next step. And the next step in this process would be to develop a reintroduction and management plan and provide that draft to the public for public review, and then come back in a year and provide that to you, the board, for your review and approval, and then to move on from there if you would deem so. So with that, I just want to make sure we throw out some acknowledgments. We sent this to over 65 groups and individuals for review, and we got over 1,000 comments back, and I just can't thank these folks enough. Not everybody's represented here because I couldn't fit them on, but we're so grateful for our many partners and the hard work that they do to help us with wildlife management in Pennsylvania. So with that, I take any questions that might have from the board.
I have a question. Why does it take a year? Why does that process take a whole year to go through before we would
For the management reintroduction plan. So we develop, when we do management plans like from the start, oftentimes with a management plan we can do it much sooner if we have an existing plan. But with management plans, it takes a long time to sit down, go through the needed literature review, and then particularly for a reintroduction plan, and when I was working on the quail plan, a lot of it's dependent on trying to come up with best methodology, so you're contacting other states on how they've done it in the past. We would need to start to look at our habitat model to develop exact release locations. And so we'd actually want to tweak our model to really zoom in on those optimal areas to develop exactly where we want to put them. We'd need to start talking with other states to see if they're even open, or Canadian provinces to see if they're even open to the idea of helping us source the populations, where they might come from, how they might get there. There's just a lot that goes into it. So and with our strategic plan, that's kind of how we wrote this goal, and the strategic plan was have you folks the feasibility assessment now, and then by June of 2023, have that. The other thing is we usually put it out for public comment for a number of months so that public comment can get it. We take those comments and we try to address those comments. It's a process, so that's generally why it takes close to a year to get that done. If we do survey work, it takes us months just to get surveys out and get those out, and then, of course, compile the results. So it's a good question, but there's just so much that goes into and it's like a 10-year plan, so we want to make sure that we give it the needed time.
Thank you for a truly excellent presentation. It was really good, thanks.
Thank you, sir. Any other questions? Comments? Okay. Thank you, folks.
Next up, we have David Stainbrook, who is going to give personal limits on antlerless deer licenses.
Good afternoon. I didn't bring any visuals. I'm a little jealous. But so the previous board meeting in April, we were tasked with evaluating the recent changes to antlerless license purchase limits or possession limits, determining whether there was any limitations on getting those licenses into the hands of hunters in our more suburban areas or our special regulation areas, specifically 2B, 5C, and 5D. And if there were limitations, to come up with a proposed solution, and that's what we're here to do today. To kind of cover what that recent change was to antlerless license limits, I'm going to go through what the previous regulation was, which had a total of 3 antlerless licenses that hunters could possess for the non-special regulation areas. That was a total of 3 that they could purchase. And then there was no purchase limit for antlerless licenses in our special regulation units, 2B, 5C, and 5D. And any licenses purchased in those units did not count towards that limit of 3. So as an example, if we're using units 4A and 5D, a hunter could only purchase up to 3 for 4A, and we're able to purchase 6 or more in 5D if they were available. One of the issues with that previous regulation was there were units that still had licenses available throughout the season, even ones that didn't sell out, specifically 4A, where hunters may have been willing to purchase more licenses and harvest more deer, but because of that limit of 3 was a major limitation. So that was the impetus for the change that took in place last year, where this was changed from 3 to a total of 6. And instead of a purchase limit, it was considered an unfilled antlerless license possession limit. And this applied for all units. So it was a hunter could have in any combination of any units up to 6 antlerless licenses before the season started. Any licenses purchased from those special regulations units now counted towards that limit of 6. And then there was a burn one, earn one option, which was essentially a replacement of any of the licenses they currently had. So if during the season, if they filled one of those original licenses that they had and licenses were still available, they could go back. Once they filled that tag and reported that deer, they could go back and purchase more if they were available. So as an example, using those same 2 units, now a hunter could purchase up to 6 in combination. So if they wanted to have 4A and 5D, they could get 3 4As, they could get 6 4As. But if they had 3 and 4A, they would only be able to get 3 and 5D before the season. And then if there were any available during the season or throughout the season and they filled their tags, they could get more. And so one of the limitations on that is if licenses are still available during the season. So we wanted to look at this past year's license sales throughout the season and throughout the different rounds. And to give you a sense of how this works is during the first 3 rounds, the majority of our units sold out during those first 3 rounds, especially some of the more sought-after units. And then when we have anything left over, it goes to over-the-counter sales. This is, again, before the season. These 4 units went to over-the-counter sales and were sold out before the season started. So you can see most of our units sold out prior to when the deer season started, and this is no different than the way it was in the past. So even though we made that change last year, we still saw the same pattern, and that change of the limit to 6 really didn't change much in how these units sold out prior to the season. What it did change is the availability of licenses during the season, and what you see here is the following units here sold out during the archery season, anywhere from 2 weeks to 6 weeks into the season. And you can see units 5C and 5D were the ones that we were asked to look at specifically at special regulation areas. And you can see that 5C sold out only 2 weeks into the archery season. And again, they have an earlier archery season because they're in the special regulations area. So essentially that meant that hunters that wanted to use that burn one or earn one option only had about 2 weeks to fill their tags to be able to go back and get more. A little bit longer in 5D. And then again, we had the area near Pittsburgh 2B, and then 4A, the core area of our CWD. Those units did not sell out, and that is pretty much what has been happening for the past few years. So even though we made this change, it really didn't affect those areas. So the burn one, earn one option, the point was it really wasn't available in most units because they sold out prior to the season. And where it was available, they sold out pretty quickly into the archery season, so it really wasn't, there was a short amount of time in those units. And then for the units that didn't sell out historically, it really didn't make a difference because those licenses were available throughout the season. You could just go buy more. You didn't have to use the burn one, earn one option. All right, so basically how many people were able to use that burn one, earn one option, and how many people would typically purchase a lot of those licenses before the season? So to look at this, we compared, basically looked at how many hunters had 7 or more antlerless licenses in the 2020 season. And again, the only way that you would have this is if you're purchasing licenses in those special regulation areas because you can only get up to 3 for all the other units. So these are primarily your hunters that are hunting in these special regs areas. And we had a little over 3,000 hunters that would be purchasing 7 or more antlerless licenses. With the change in 2021, you could not purchase 7 or more antlerless licenses before the season, right? So you had to, during the season, fill one of those original 6 to be able to get a 7th. So basically the number here, that 698, is our best estimate of how many people, because they had at least a 7th or more antlerless license, that's how many people were able to use that burn one or earn one option to, to get that 7th or more antlerless license. So what does this mean? This means that if we subtract these two numbers, that's roughly a little over 2,000 hunters that were limited in their ability to purchase 7 or more antlerless license in these special regulation areas and harvest additional deer. And then fewer than 700 hunters that were able to use the burn one, earn one option that was new that year. So that's how many licenses people purchased. Let's look at how many deer were harvested. And so if we look at what was reported to us, only in 5C and 5D, because that's really where this was most limiting. If you compare the 2020-21 season to this past season, and we really look at that, how many hunters took 7, 8, 9, or 10 or more deer and reported it to us, you can see a pretty big difference between just how many hunters. There were 18 hunters that took 7 deer, 13 that took 8, 25 that took 10 or more, and then compared to the limitations that were placed on them for the 2021-22 season, where in order for them to have gotten 10 or more, they would have had to have hurried up and filled those tags during the archery season to be able to purchase more. So it went from 68 down to 27, and this is just from what's reported, so it could be greater than that because not all hunters report. But the points here are that the reduction in personal limits did affect some hunters in units 5C and 5D. Although it's a small number, it is, these tend to be the more successful hunters that take multiple deer. So it limited their ability to purchase additional licenses and harvest additional deer. And when we look at our estimated harvest between those 2 years, it's right around 21,000. So it didn't lead to an increase in harvest, and it didn't really lead to more efficient use of those antlerless licenses. Some of the things that we were hoping it would. All right, so back to the question that we were asked is to evaluate if those recent changes did have impacts in those special regulations areas. We did find that the changes did limit the ability of some hunters, not a lot, but some, to access multiple antlerless licenses and harvest multiple antlerless deer in those 2 units, 5C and 5D. And so there's various ways to remove those limitations. There's a lot of options we can look at, but the one that staff recommended was just to simplify the regulation and remove the purchase limit in all units. And this would essentially make that burn one, earn one option and the unfilled license limit unnecessary. I think it greatly simplifies the regulation, streamlines it, and essentially the 3 rounds of the antlerless license sales offer that fair way to distribute those first 3 licenses, and it's when most of the units sell out during those 3 rounds, or at least during the beginning of the season. So really, for most units and most hunters, it's really not going to change much, because this has happened in the past and it will continue to happen, that they'll sell out during those before the season. But for those units that do have remaining antlerless licenses, going into the season or after those 3 rounds, they can continue to be sold over the counter and during the season if they're still available. A big thing here is this isn't going to lead to over-harvesting or under-harvesting based on our goals, because the antlerless harvest will continue to be controlled by those allocations, and those allocations can be adjusted accordingly if license fill rates are changing. And then again, lastly, there are going to be situations where there's properties that they would like to have more hunters or more permits available to them, and the unit level allocation just isn't enough. And we'll continue to have our deer management assistance program as an option for those folks to continue to get antlerless deer permits to meet their individual landowner goals on top of this. So in summary, we were asked to evaluate it, and our recommendation as a staff is we recommend no purchase limit in all units to simplify this regulation. And I'm happy to take any questions.
Yeah, I do. Since I was the commissioner that asked for your evaluation, I want to express my sincere thanks. Very, very good job, very thorough.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I know it's a small number of hunters that are affected, but nevertheless, why should we do that to them? And we need to control those deer. And I really appreciate your evaluation, and I also very much appreciate your recommendation. I didn't think that you would come up with that, but I'm impressed.
Thanks.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Next up is Andrea Corman, who's going to talk about urine, attractants, and CWD.
Good afternoon. At the last board meeting, we were asked to evaluate our current urine attractant ban. And so today I will present our findings on attractant risk and chronic wasting disease. I wanted to just start us off with very brief background on chronic wasting disease. So chronic wasting disease, CWD, is an always fatal brain disease that affects members of the cervid family. So in Pennsylvania, that would be our white-tailed deer and elk. It's also contagious and spreads through exposure to contaminated environments and by direct animal-to-animal contact. Unfortunately, there is no vaccine or treatment for chronic wasting disease, and while some new research suggests that some deer are genetically less susceptible to CWD than others, no deer or elk are actually immune to the disease. They can all contract CWD, and all of those that do will die, but not before spreading the disease across the landscape. It also has a very long incubation period, which means that animals look healthy even though they are infected and spreading the disease. On average, CWD-infected individuals do not show signs of the disease for 18 to 24 months. So this means infected deer often look completely healthy. The only way to really tell if it's infected is to have the brain or lymph nodes tested. Currently, there are no approved live tests for CWD. Now, research has shown that remarkably small doses of prions can infect deer, which has been apparent every year as more and more deer are infected in Pennsylvania. A study showed that deer can become infected with CWD after only being exposed to feed buckets, water, and bedding that was removed from a CWD-positive pen. New research has also revealed that doses as small as 100 to 300 nanograms of CWD-positive brain equivalent are infectious. Now, nanograms is a unit of measurement most people are not familiar with. So just how small is a nanogram? Well, if we think about a sunflower seed, that would weigh about 52 million nanograms. So if you imagine trying to cut a sunflower seed into 52 million pieces, that's about the size of a nanogram. And a piece of infected brain, the size of a sunflower seed, would contain over 170,000 infectious doses. So it might be difficult to really comprehend those numbers, but we can see the significance of these small doses when we consider the potential for urine to contaminate the environment. Now, it's well known that saliva, feces, and urine of infected deer contain these infectious CWD prions. The shedding of CWD prions into the environment by a positive animal is sufficient to transmit the disease to an uninfected deer, even in the absence of direct animal-to-animal contact. Now, based on the results of new and previous research, it's estimated that 4 ounces of urine, so the typical size of a bottle of urine attractant, could deposit 6 to 12 infectious doses into the environment. And those 6 to 12 doses can remain infectious for years. Natural deer behavior predisposes deer to exposure of naturally occurring infectious bodily fluids. They can ingest or inhale the soil particles, both incidentally as part of natural foraging activities and deliberately through activities like interacting with scrapes. And as shown here, deer of both sexes visit and can congregate at scrapes. And while this behavior occurs naturally, it can also be induced. Deer readily use these artificial scrape sites created by people year-round. Any attractant or circumstance that creates the components of a scrape, whether they are natural or synthetic, increases that risk of disease transmission. And while we can't change natural deer behavior, aside from reducing the number of deer in an area, we can address the human behavior that increases that risk of spreading CWD. And while CWD is the disease we worry about the most, it's not the only deer disease that's out there. Attraction points allow transmission of other diseases as well. And permitting the use of attractants imposes an unnecessary and avoidable risk of introduction and spread of the disease. Also, urine attractants are produced in captive cervid facilities. And while the animals on these facilities are regulated by Department of Ag, Even those enrolled in the herd certification programs are not guaranteed CWD free. In fact, Pennsylvania has multiple examples of state and federally certified herds containing CWD infected deer. In addition, there are no regulations covering the production, manufacturing, or sale of urine attractants. Therefore, there is no regulatory requirement or independent authority to test for presence of CWD prions in these attractants. There is no record of facilities that produce them, and there's no traceability of these products. We know the risks of attractants. There's potential for numerous infectious doses in small quantities. There's long-term environmental contamination, clear examples of deer behavior that exposes them to human-placed attractants, no guarantee of CWD-free status, and no regulation of the product. But do attractants offer an advantage that outweighs all of these risks? Well, based on Pennsylvania deer hunter surveys, they don't seem to. Pennsylvania deer hunters actually report similar harvest success regardless of urine attractant use. And should CWD prions be introduced to a novel area in Pennsylvania or CWD spread through the use of these products, there could be substantial impacts to wildlife, stakeholders, and the agency. A CWD outbreak results in reduced survival of deer and additional restrictions imposed on the public in infected areas, which also may negatively impact hunter participation and Pennsylvania's hunting traditions. The cost to the agency for management and monitoring of the disease is significant, both financially and in terms of staff time and resources. While there's still much that is unknown about CWD, there are things we do know that are very concerning. Research conducted on CWD has demonstrated that it can pass through the digestive tract of scavengers and predators and remain infectious. Plants can uptake prions and remain infectious. Soils retain infectious prions for years, and water sources can be contaminated with CWD prions. And when compared with other prion disease agents, CWD prions are more adaptable to other species in laboratory settings. Research involving swine and non-human primates has demonstrated susceptibilities of species beyond cervids. People and other species frequently interact with deer in a variety of ways, and as the state agency tasked with managing and protecting wildlife and their habitats while promoting hunting and trapping for current and future generations, it is the Game Commission's responsibility to do what we can to limit exposure of all species to this known pathogen and be responsive to this threat to public resources. And with that, I can take any questions.
Yeah, I was the one who had asked for this, and again, thank you for a fantastic presentation. I think it gives us a lot to think about. I think it's pretty obvious what we need to do, but thank you.
Thank you.
So that concludes the meeting today. We're going to have staff reports following this, and then we meet tomorrow morning at 8:30 for public comments. Thank you.